mandate be struck down tomorrow by executive order?
Yeah, I suppose it could. I mean, it was signed by executive order, right? I mean, it was passed.
Which means the president, right?
Pardon me?
Which means the president.
Right.
Sign it tomorrow.
Right, yeah, and yeah. So this next election is going to be very critical.
So what does Romney say about it?
Oh, he's been very public about being supportive of the church's religious liberty, and Mormons are very sensitive to religious liberty issues.
So he would strike it down.
That's my understanding, is that he would. Well, I think he said he would strike down the entire Affordable Care Act. I think he doesn't like, and there, and we as Catholics, it's hard for us because there's many parts of that act that we as a church were very supportive of. For example, the extending parental coverage, for dependent children till the age of 25. We already did that at the Archdiocese, in fact, even before we were mandated to do it. So there were some aspects of it that really were helpful to family life that we really supported. So, you hate to see the baby thrown out with the bathwater, but unfortunately, the administration will not budge on this particular piece. And for us, it's a non-negotiable. I mean, we're not going to comply, and then I don't know what that's going to mean for so many of our institutions.
Okay. This is just a comment. I guess in an Illinois Right to Life bulletin, it stated that more women are involved in Right to Life and the pro-life movement than there are in pro-choice organizations.
Yeah, that's true. That's actually true. That's always been the case. That's kind of an interesting little fun fact. Thank you to whoever brought that up. That if you go all the way back to 1973, University of Michigan. So this is the year that abortion, the Roe versus Wade overturned all the state abortion laws. The University of Michigan study found that men were much more likely to want to guarantee women the right to abortion than women were to want that right themselves. You go all the way up until the present day, in fact, where Faye Waddleton, who was the former spokesperson for Planned Parenthood, was bemoaning the fact that so many younger women are pro-life now. And women have always been slightly more pro-life than men. And that kind of makes sense to me just as a woman, because anybody who has seen an ultrasound picture, you will generally always self-identify as pro-life after that point. I mean, no disrespect to the men who are present here, but abortion's been a really good thing for men. And the founding feminists, in fact, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Susan B. Anthony, Alice Paul, who wrote the first Equal Rights Amendment, were all very, very staunchly pro-life. And one of the reasons they were staunchly pro-life is because they saw abortion as a way that men used to exploit women, and to use women and not to be able to care for them and their children whose lives were so strictly bound up in their own. So they were all very adamantly pro-life. So, and it's kind of carried on to the present day. And that's what, it was interesting. Yesterday I was at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C., and one of the reporters who was there asked me why I thought Romney was now polling better with women than President Obama was. And now, again, I'm not endorsing or telling you not to vote for any particular candidate, but my sense of it was, this is how I answered the reporter, at that convention, I don't know if you watched much of the Democratic convention, but it was so hyper-focused on abortion, it was weird. I mean, did anybody notice that? Was it just me? It was like, yay, abortion, yay, Planned Parenthood. And even at last night's debate, President Obama mentioned the nation's largest abortion provider 3 separate times during that debate last night. And this is not what women's #1 concern is. In fact, you look at, I kind of laugh, it's not really a scientific poll, but Ms. Magazine polled all of its readers and said, what are the most important issues to you? And #1 on the list was balancing my work and my family. That was #1. You know what was last? Keeping abortion legal. But they've taken the last thing on the list and they've made it the most important thing, and they've taken the most important thing and pushed it way down the line, and women are like, forget about it. I really don't want to hear about giving more money to Planned Parenthood. We already give millions and millions and $400 million a year, I believe. It's $487 million a year, I think is what we subsidize Planned Parenthood to. And, and I'm working 40 hours a week, and I got 3 kids in school, and I'm barely making ends meet, and my husband can't get enough work. I mean, this is what people are concerned about. Those are women's real concerns. And some may be concerned about the legality of abortion, but it's not the #1 concern. And I think there's been a real miscalculation on some campaign strategists' part to make that the issue.
Okay, thank you. As part of your research on this topic, did you find many references to the writings of Edith Stein, particularly in the documents of John Paul II?
Yeah, I love. Does anyone know who Edith Stein is? Edith Stein and I have the same birthday, so I know lots about Edith Stein.
She's a saint.
She is a saint. She is a saint. Edith Stein is very cool. Edith Stein was raised an Orthodox Jew in Germany, and then about when she in her late teens, she decided she was an atheist, and she became a rabid atheist, and then had a dramatic conversion and became a Catholic, much to her parents' dismay, because they were an Orthodox Jewish family, okay, in Germany in the 1930s. So you see where I'm going with this. And she decided to become a Carmelite nun, and she became a Carmelite nun. Entered the convent, and then the Holocaust began. And in order to try to save her and protect her, the Carmelite sisters kept moving her. They kept moving her further and further away from Germany. They kept moving her further north, and she wound up at a Carmel in Holland. And then one Sunday, the Dutch bishops issued a public statement against Hitler, and Hitler went and rounded up any Jewish converts to Catholicism, rounded them all up, and Edith Stein died at Auschwitz. But she was a brilliant philosopher, a brilliant theologian, and talked often about, because she had come from a position of atheism and had come from a position of course, being a Jew in her, in her birth and her raising, had some incredible. I don't have any particular quotes with me from her, but she's really smart. So I have a friend who was a PhD candidate at the University of Chicago who became a Catholic while at the University of Chicago studying her works, and she was nothing. She was not an atheist. She was just kind of more agnostic. And she took Edith Stein as her Saint Teresa Benedicta was her religious name, and so she's Saint Teresa Benedicta, but Edith Stein was her birth name. But she took Teresa Benedicta as her baptismal name because she felt like she really came into the church after having read her works. I don't think, sister, we have anything by Teresa Benedicta, but the Daughters of St. Paul would have that. It's online and on Michigan Avenue at their wonderful store.
Okay. Next question, and if this isn't clear, the person who wrote this can clarify this. Is it true that employers are mandated to deduct a certain amount to fund abortion? Can Catholics say no to this deduction? How much is it? Yeah,
you know what, I'm sorry, I don't know the answer to that, and that might vary from state to state. I don't know the answer to that. So, there are some federally funded abortions already, and as I mentioned, the government already gives tremendous subsidies to Planned Parenthood, which is our nation's largest provider of abortion. So there's already a lot of government money involved in abortion anyway. Now, whether or not it's actually deducted, that might depend on your particular insurance plan with your company. Like, I know we have a carve-out in our insurance. I couldn't get an abortion if I tried with my insurance, thankfully. So I'm sorry, I really don't know the answer to that. If you want to tell me who you are, I could try and find the answer for you and call you up or send you an email this week. Yeah.
Okay, next one. Do you have a question on the card?
Well, here. Right here, Planned Parenthood and the genocide issue. Does the church do enough in talking about the fact that Planned Parenthood is the source of genocide in this country regarding African Americans?
Yeah. You know who has really speaks out on that very beautifully? Do you know Bishop Joseph Perry, who's one of our auxiliary bishops here in the Archdiocese of Chicago, who is an African American, and he speaks on that as an African American Catholic quite regularly. And you know who else I think is one of the most outspoken people on this who I really like. I really like reading her stuff is Alveda King, Dr. Alveda King, who's Martin Luther King's niece, who is herself post-abortive. I think she's had 2 or 3 abortions, I think, but is now very, very active. And she's still Baptist. She's not a Catholic, but she works for Priests for Life, the Catholic organization Priests for Life, and she helps to draw attention to the fact that the majority of Black pregnancies are now aborted.
See, that's not good enough, though.
Yeah. No, I understand what you're saying.
The Cardinal himself should be doing that,
yeah.
And he's not doing that. And you need to ask him when you go back to work or whenever you see him why he is not doing that.
Okay, that's it. Yeah, it is, because it is when you think, African American women of color in general abort at a much higher rate per capita than white middle class women do. Now, the vast majority of abortions are done on white middle class college girls. That's the largest number. So it's white girls between the ages of, I think it's 18 and 23, have the largest number. But per capita, if you do it sort of by race, the largest number of abortions are in the African American and the, sadly, growingly the Latino community. And if you look in Chicago, I did this one time when I first started running the Respect Life office.
But your abortions are contraceptive.
What's that? Pardon me?
Your abortions are in the
Not always. No, the surgical. If you talk about surgical abortions, the largest number, because there are more white people in the population overall. So if you just look at it by sheer numbers, the largest number. But per capita, when you just kind of divide it up and look, all things being equal, African Americans and Latinos have a larger number. And if I did this when I began in the Respect Life office, to look to see where the abortion clinics are in Chicago. You know where they are?
In the black community.
They're in the black community,
But
exactly. They're in the
the,
black, or near college campuses. There's one up near Loyola, there's one near DePaul. So they go kind of where the business is, but the majority of them are in black and Hispanic neighborhoods. And black and Hispanic women, I think, are particularly targeted, for abortion by abortion providers in a way that's incredibly unseemly. But you're absolutely right. And there are a good number of black ministers. Dr. Hiram Crawford, do you know him? But I'm always a little disappointed that there's not, among some of the black pastors who are very outspoken on incredibly important issues, that there's not more of that acknowledgement among them as well. But it's something I'm happy to mention to the Cardinal for you too.
I would appreciate that.
Sure. And Bishop Perry's been great. If next time he's talking, or you can get him to come here. And there's that new movie, Mafa 7, which is all about genocide in the black community, abortion genocide in the black community. Very powerful.
I heard the percentage just the other day, though. African Americans, it's 1/3 and 2/3 are white and others.
Right, right.
So it's not exactly being told as correctly.
Oh,
as
no, it isn't. And there's tremendous economic pressure on African Americans to work, and there's a tremendous reluctance to promote adoption among African Americans. In fact, one of the most difficult adoption, placements you can try to find is to try to find an African American baby to be adopted by a middle class African American couple. Talk to some of them who will say you can't, because African American women either parent or they abort. There's no talk about adoption in our community, and it's very painful for the people who really want to make, adoption plans. But thank you, that's a very important point, and very painful one too.
Okay, next question. I heard a priest publicly say last year in November, before all this HHS hoopla started, that churches and their affiliate organizations would lose their nonprofit, not-for-profit status. What does this mean?
Okay, so that means that that particular churches who have what's called 501c3 status, have tax-exempt status from the government, cannot endorse particular candidates or particular parties. It does not mean you cannot talk about issues. So the Cardinals had very, very strong letters and bulletins and have spoken about this publicly in every sector of the Archdiocese about the HHS mandate as an issue. You can talk about abortion as an issue. You can talk about immigration as an issue. You can talk about issues you cannot support, endorse, or denounce any particular candidate for office. So that's probably what that, so no one can get up and say, you must vote for Obama, that's the Catholic way, or you must vote for Romney, that's the Catholic way. You cannot do that. That would jeopardize our status, because that means we're endorsing a political party.
Would you tell us a bit about the book, Breaking Through? How did it come about?
Yes.
What does it cover, and how did you become involved?
Okay, great, terrific. So this is the book. Now, I did mention this today. So this is the book that was just launched yesterday. It's called Breaking Through, Catholic Women Speak for Themselves. And I just want to make clear, Sister Ann has been very gracious to bring a number of copies here tonight. I don't make anything from the sale of this book, okay? So I don't make it. You can buy one or not buy one. It will not make any difference in my pocketbook whatsoever. So I don't receive any kind of royalties or anything like that from the sale of the book. So the book came directly out of the HHS mandate controversy when Helen Alvarez, who was formerly the pro-life spokesperson for the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, heard that statement that there is a war on women that is being waged by the Catholic Church, and that 98% of Catholic women don't agree with the Catholic Church's teaching on contraception and on pretty much everything else. She told me that she and I have been friends for 20 years, and she was making chicken soup for her kids in her kitchen, and she had an idea, and she said, none of the women I know think this way. I have lots of friends. I'm going to write a statement. So she called Kim Daniels, who was another friend of ours, who's a religious liberty attorney who lives in Washington, and said, are you thinking what I'm thinking? And she said, I think so. And she said, we have to do something. So they started a movement online, an online petition called women speak for themselves, to say, you cannot tell us, government, what we as Catholic women think. And it was just a general statement saying, we as Catholic women, it began really with women who work for the church, which is why I found out about it so quickly. And so, for example, professors at universities and teachers and our employees and women religious. And you cannot tell us as Catholic women what we think and what we believe. And we are proud of our church. And we are proud of its history of serving people in need. And we are proud of its educational institutions. And we are proud of its teachings. And we live the teachings. That's all basically it said. And don't tell us, government, that you speak for us and that we should be ashamed of our church. So within a couple of weeks, it had 35,000 women who had signed it. So Helen then decided that wasn't good enough. She wanted to write a book. So, and she wanted to find 9 very different Catholic women from different walks of life to each tackle kind of a tough topic that people might find very controversial, and people might think, oh gosh, you're not going to find anybody who thinks that way. And she found it. So she has a Dr. Marie Anderson, who's an OBGYN, who not only used contraception herself, but prescribed contraception herself. She did sterilizations and she did abortions, and she did abortions particularly on disabled children. She had a major conversion in her life and now works for a pro-life, NFP-only OBGYN practice in Washington, D.C. So she had her give her testimony and her life story about how the church's teachings. She said, I would see all these women and I would put them on contraception and I'd stick Depo-Provera in them and they'd be back again 2 years later, pregnant again. With another out-of-wedlock child. And they weren't happy. They were miserable. And she said, and I'd sterilize my married clients, and they'd come back to me 2 years later in tears saying, can you undo the sterilization? I'm miserable. And she said, I discovered that by practicing the church's teaching and by walking with these women, they were happier and I was happier. And she came into it fully, ready to go against all the church's teaching. So she's one of the contributors. A psychologist who works with women who have experienced same-sex attraction. We have a lawyer who talked about the need for community. I wrote a chapter on materialism. We had a younger woman in her late 20s write about how contraception and abortion has changed the sex and mating and dating market, and how she as a young woman can barely go out on one date with a young man who won't expect that they will hook up at the end of the night because that's just what everybody does now, and how the Catholic Church responds to that without you looking like you're a freak, and a woman, terrific Sister Mary Gabriel, who's a Sister of Life, a new congregation of women religious, talk about how, despite the fact that it broke her parents' heart, she decided she wanted to be a nun. And she wasn't from a particularly practicing Catholic family, and just really, God really broke through her one day. And she said, I knew that's what he wanted me to do. And she writes about how she came to be a sister. So just women from all sorts of different walks of Catholic life. Mary Devlin Capizzi, who is a very high-powered Washington attorney. If you were in the legal business, you would know who she was. And she has 6 children, and she's the major breadwinner for her family. Her husband's a theology professor and doesn't make very much money. He stays home with their 6 kids. And she is there, but she talks about the tensions, and she said, I'm very much a Catholic mother, I'm a daughter of the church, and I'm my family breadwinner. So people from all sorts of different walks of life who talked about how the church informs us and how the church's teaching has freed us and made us more free to be happy and to be who we really are. So that's the book, and it's available for sale. And if you know women who might be struggling with particular teaching, it's one that you can kind of pick up and put down and pick up and put down because it's different people's stories. But I was so blessed. So Helen had just called me and said, I really want your voice in this book, and would you write on this? I think she knew my love for shoes, and she said, so would you write about materialism? I'm like, oh, come on, that's so embarrassing. I don't want to write about that. But anyway, everybody had to kind of stretch beyond their comfort zones to be part of the book, and so that was my little cross, my little sacrifice. But I was, just really blessed to be part of it.
Okay. Okay. There's a perception that that abortion, contraception, and these services in this HHS mandate are health care.
Right.
Where does that come from? And how does the church respond to that?
Yeah. Well, it comes from this sort of misguided notion that pregnancy is a disease that's to be avoided at all costs. when the fact that a woman is able to conceive means that her body is doing what it's supposed to be doing. When you can't conceive, that's a disease, okay? So that's a disease. But the fact that you can conceive is a sign that your body is doing what it's so. This thing is pregnancy as really bad thing that we have to avoid at all costs. That's what's driving a lot of this. And now, what a lot of people don't realize, although there is, there's a growing body of scientific evidence that I think is alarming many women and driving many women to us for not religious reasons, but for simply practical reasons, is that there are a lot of health effects and side effects to using artificial contraception. The birth control pill is a class 1 carcinogen. I mean, everybody knows that, right? There's an increased chance of blood clot. There's an increased chance of breast cancer. It's a carcinogen. You are putting a steroid into your body to make yourself sexually available to men. This is not freeing for women either medically or psychologically or certainly spiritually. And, and of course, obviously abortion has with it, surgical abortion and chemical abortions have with them their own particular risks. But there is still sort of that myth, I think, among many people in the abortion industry and the contraception industry who simply wanted that abortion and contraception have been good for women, when in fact they have completely, as the book will point out, they've changed the dating market, they've changed the marriage market. The book, the chapter in the book on this points out, very readily how men are so much more hesitant to marry now because they see no point in it, because a hookup is in any bar that they want to go to on any Saturday night. Sex has become so detached from bonding and from children and from permanence and from marriage to the point that it affects even those who are married. And that's one of the sort of the troubling things about it too. Now, I don't want the evening to pass without saying something about what the church teaches in terms of spacing children, because I don't want anyone to leave with the false impression the church is saying that women should have as many children as absolutely possible and do it as quickly as possible, and that everybody should be having 10 children. Now, my husband and I have always lived according to the church teaching in our marriage, and we only have 3 children. You can responsibly space children by using what's called natural family planning, which is not the rhythm method. If I had a dime for every person who said that's just the rhythm method, it's not the rhythm method. Even Planned Parenthood acknowledges that it is a legitimate form of spacing children. They would call it family planning. We would say spacing children. And what NFP does is that, first of all, it's completely chemical-free, scientifically based, and it has a 99% effectiveness rate. What's sort of interesting about artificial contraception is it has a pretty high failure rate. In fact, Planned Parenthood's own statistics show that 50% of the women coming to them for abortions were using contraception at the time they got pregnant. And of course, abortion is always the fallback, or is often the fallback when that happens. So 50% of the women coming to Planned Parenthood for abortions were using contraception, and they said either the contraception failed them or they weren't using it properly. With NFP, the beauty of NFP is that you're not having relations at the time that you are the most fertile, that you're most mutually fertile. And what I like about it as a woman is that the responsibility for family planning rests on both people in the marriage. It's not all put on the women. It's not all, oh, did you take your pill today, or did you get that shot this month, or did you get that thing inserted inside yourself? I mean, it's, in terms of our own dignity as women, I've always found that very offensive. And what's wonderful about NFP is that your husband and you are equally responsible for maintaining and for supporting each other in using this method. And it's kind of neat because we have, in this effort now where everything has to be green, right? Everything has to be organic and everything has to be recyclable. You still have so many women who will say, but I'm going to put a steroid into my body every single day. It's not natural, and our method is very natural. Mother Teresa had tremendous success teaching it to women in India to bring down the tremendous population rate in India. It works very well in cultures where they are not, where, unlike us, where we pop a pill for everything, where women are not accustomed and don't have access to that kind of regular pharmaceutical lifestyle that we have. Because it's natural and just simply involves charting and charting your fertile period. So it's and NFP can be morally used to space children, and there are legitimate reasons, the illness of a spouse or psychological stress or other very serious reasons. Couples have to enter into that conversation very prayerfully, but there are legitimate reasons that the church has seized to either delay or to avoid pregnancy at certain times during your marriage.
Some Catholic politicians say they're practicing Catholics and support the HHS mandate. What can be done to clarify that we do not agree with their statements?
I don't know. I mean, I think the bishops have been awfully clear about this, that that the HHS mandate is a real threat to religious liberty, that it is a real, it's a legitimate and real concern, and if they don't see that as such, perhaps they don't, the issue hasn't been properly explained to them. I mean, it's kind of hard to comment on that without having a specific instance or specific circumstance put in front of me. I spoke at a Chicago Bar Association, CLE, it was called the CLE, Continuing Legal Education class, on the HHS mandate, and the number of lawyers who didn't understand what we were saying was kind of surprising to me, and many lawyers don't